I want to talk in this segment about BLM, Black Lives Matter, and the art of the racial shakedown. Now, kind of what prods me to go into this is I spoke yesterday on the podcast about Patrisse Khan-Cullors, one of the three founders of Black Lives Matter. And she is going all over the world buying real estate, apparently dropping millions of dollars. She has a $1 million plus property in LA. She's bought some other properties in America. She was spotted in the Bahamas looking at $5 million estates in a community that apparently includes Justin Timberlake and Tiger Woods. Her place in Georgia is a 3.2-acre ranch that includes a private airplane hangar and a runway where you can land private planes. So here is one Marxist who has been taking in the money while not really telling a lot of people about it. Well, some people are finding out about it. So Hank Newsom, the head of Black Lives Matter in New York, has called for an investigation. He goes, if you go around calling yourself a socialist, you have to ask how much of her own personal money is going to charitable causes. It's really sad because it makes people doubt the validity of the movement. Yeah, exactly. And then here's Michael Brown Sr. By the way, this is the guy whose son, Michael Brown Jr., was killed in Ferguson. This is part of what propelled the Black Lives Matter movement. And he basically says that he's got no money. So it's all raised in his name. But the bottom line of it is, he goes, why hasn't my family's foundation received any assistance from the movement? The answer is because Patrisse Khan-Cullors and her buddies are really busy in the Bahamas. Don't call them, they'll call you, Mr. Brown. So this whole thing is a racket. BLM, by the way, raised $90 million last year, so there's a lot of moolah to go around. But part of what I want to go into is the art of how they get this money. And this has to do with the shakedown. And the shakedown, by the way, was not invented by BLM, although they've carried it to a new level. They've perfected it. They have essentially created a ransom system in which, to avoid being accused of racism, you have to pay up. And by paying up, you go in their good books, and they don't attack you, and in fact, they attack your competitors. So there's kind of a business deal built into it. They will attack your competitors for bigotry while exonerating you for bigotry, but you have to pay. Now, I kind of stumbled into this scheme myself in the early 1990s, if I recall. I was talking to a guy who's very high up in NASCAR. This is the NASCAR car company. And he was talking to me about how Jesse Jackson had sort of invented this racket. So Jackson invented it. People like Al Sharpton then got into the game, and now BLM has taken it to a whole new level. But I think if we look at the original racket, you get a pretty good sense of how this stuff works. So it turns out that the guy who founded NASCAR was kind of a blue-collar guy, Mr. France. And he had made some insensitive statement about why there weren't enough blacks driving cars, driving NASCAR. And he said something like, well, blacks don't have any money. And what he really meant to say is that by and large, this is a sport that it's very expensive to be part of it. You require sponsorships. It's an expensive to be a driver. And because blacks disproportionately don't have as much money, they're less likely to be drivers. But he didn't say it that way. He said it kind of in a crude way. So then what happens, according to my NASCAR source, is that Jesse Jackson shows up and he goes, Mr. France, the brothers they're very angry. They're very angry. And Mr. France is like, well, I didn't mean anything. And Jackson's like, I know you didn't mean anything, but listen, the brothers are restless. You need to kind of bring me in because I will smooth them over. I will calm the brothers so they won't be, protesting outside your company or calling you a racist. So Mr. France is like, you know what, that sounds really good, Mr. Jackson. How can you help me? And Jackson's like, that's it. I just want to help. Well, listen, my associate from Atlanta will visit you next week. He will lay out the terms and conditions and we'll work all this out. And so the two men sort of shake hands. And so, well, the associate comes in from Atlanta the next week and he's like, listen, here are our non-negotiable demands. Number one, you, NASCAR, will write a $250,000 check right now to Operation Push, which is the Jesse Jackson organization. Number two, the Reverend Jackson will have access to the NASCAR airplane on a, quote, as-needed basis to do his wonderful philanthropic and charitable work. Number three, NASCAR will agree to hire this many people in this many management positions and pay for these training programs. So it was basically kind of a list of demands. It reminded me of the mafia showing up on Canal Street, in the early part of the 20th century and telling business owners, listen, we'll offer you protection, but you have to pay. And if you don't pay, we'll come and we will destroy your store and you will find your son with a knife in his back. And this is similar. The threat here is the threat of racial blackmail. And the offer is that if you pay, you'll be protected. You'll be protected by who? By the very people who are threatening you. But here's the key point. The main difference between Black Lives Matter, let's say, or Jesse Jackson on the one hand, and the mafia on the other, is that the mafia didn't pretend to be the good guys. They would just come in and go, we're bad guys, we're gonna beat you up if you don't pay. Whereas these guys come in wearing a halo. The Reverend Jackson, his philanthropic work. He needs your airplane to do his much needed social missions and so on. So what happens is that the gangsters in this case are gangsters who come in with robes and with a halo. They're bad guys who pretend to be good guys. So their thuggery is masked by the veil of social justice. And that's the key point for people like Patrice Kahn-Calors. All the Marxist rhetoric, we tend to read all this stuff and go, oh, these are people who are following a dangerous left-wing ideology and so on. For them, it's claptrap. They no more believe in it than Hugo Chavez believed in it. For Hugo Chavez, who died a billionaire in Venezuela, it was all about the money. Similarly for Lenin, for Stalin, it was all about the money. One of the first things Lenin did when he came to power, he bought a fleet of Rolls Royces. And according to a recent documentary that I saw, when Stalin came in, he had a big disagreement with Lenin. He didn't like the idea of the Rolls Royces. He preferred the Packard, so he bought a fleet of Packards. So the bottom line of it is these are thugs who see in the rhetoric of social justice and the rhetoric of Marxism itself, they probably think, who was that dunce Marx with all this rubbish that he was talking about, this mumbo jumbo about the proletariat? We don't care about any of that. Communists and other societies have been perfectly happy to, they make a symbol, the hammer and sickle, which represents the worker and the farmer. Well, they don't hesitate to kill the workers and kill the farmers. And similarly, here today, the left in America, they don't care about the farmers. They don't care about the working class. Who do they care about? One group of people, themselves.